point out tonight, and I always do, who to contact. I'll give out some numbers. I don't have a present PowerPoint or anything, but hopefully people will be able to write it down. But if we put it on your website, then that takes care of that.
It's going out live. Town board meetings.
Okay.
To the channels, music channel. Rising and Optimum. And then it's also on the
Chevy from
Yeah. America did that. People watch it? I don't know. At these meetings? Oh, yes. 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 They want to stay well.
Urine infections here and there, like we had 1.3 weeks had allergies, and like 6 weeks were home. How are the allergies going to be? So we watched it. See the allergies get better. Again, they're going to a person that needs to work. It's like one of the eye drops and stuff like that. So we'll watch it. Have them all the time. So we have like absolute 5 because he gets anxiety and catches.
The reality is that the things that I'm telling you are the things that I'm also nothing is my opinion, nothing is, this is what I like to do, this is all just perspective stuff. So it makes it easy to follow. Yeah. You can be in favor of them or not. The reality is, we have a lot of issues.
For Chevy, I have shown the doctor's note. This one is so there's not
I will mention it as an option. That's all. Just the general. Yeah. Just leave it. Well, that's what people want. The reality is people would be calling me and saying, especially because, we have, even when we used county, so, so, that area is this thing. What's the next town? Right. There you go, Newcastle, you guys don't have a problem. Here's 7 more.
We have ours.
That's funny. That's funny. So I brought about 20 of those this morning. Keep them around. We'll leave them right here. Is that not enough?
No, I'm just going to introduce you. Cleveland.
We want to make this a contentious meeting. Let's talk about that. Oh my God. That would be far worse than anything to talk about.
Too much puzzles is good.
So we'll be outside.
He's like, no, you don't. To be honest with you. No, you
You're in the
don't.
headlights and he'd run.
You see it with a chainsaw.
So I need the microphone, right?
Yeah.
Okay, because I'm pretty loud. I don't usually need one, but I need it because it's being recorded, right?
So where do you want to stand?
I'll stand right up there at the
At the
podium.
podium? Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Talk about baseball. Or talk about the Giants. Derek Waller.
Check. Oh.
Is that where this is going to go? Oh, that's actually, I see we have.
Set? Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. With us, we have Kevin Clark from New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. He's a wildlife biologist. Also with us is our animal warden, Marty Rogers, and wildlife expert, Jim Horton from Quality Pest, Pro Pest and Wildlife Services. We're not here to solve any issues. We're here to give you information. That's the whole point of this get-together. So we hope that you gather information that helps you. If you do have some questions, I'm sure they'll be very helpful in answering whatever questions they have. So, Kevin, you want to start off?
Sure.
Okay, hi folks, how are you? I've done a lot of these talks. Welcome to the Westchester Coyote Tour. I started doing this back in 2006, and coyotes were one of the first species that I started dealing with. Public meetings became a regular for me, and I will say I am as terrified about speaking to the public as anybody on this planet, and yet I've made a living doing it. And I don't know how. I'm glad to see that there's a turnout for this meeting. Usually when I do these meetings, it's part of a larger town board meeting. I don't usually get my own slot for meetings like this, but this just goes to show over time how things have changed. And a lot of municipalities, especially in the Westchester County area, have put more thought into how do we deal with coyotes. They want to put more information out there for the public. They want to make sure that people are educated as far as who to call, what to be concerned about, what to do, how to live with coyotes on the landscape. And I'm glad to see that municipalities like Mount Pleasant are taking the forefront here and having meetings specifically related to coyotes and dealing with coyotes and living with coyotes. So, just to give you guys a little background information, I could talk for a long time about coyotes. There's a lot of information I could give you. I could feed you their whole natural history. I'll talk a little bit about that at some point, because their natural history, their breeding and their dispersal and things like that kind of dictate when we see issues on the landscape. So we'll get into that a little bit. But first and foremost, coyotes are relatively new to Westchester County. They've been here for probably about 30 years now. They came from the Midwest, they came from Canada, they came north and south of the Great Lakes in Westchester and New York City, and Long Island were the last places in New York to be colonized. So they are relatively new on the landscape. There's a lot of people that still are not very familiar with coyotes and what to do when they see coyotes and what to be concerned about when coyotes live in the area. And so we'll cover that a little bit today. So they're here for good. They've been here for about 30 years, but they've become very accustomed to living in these suburban settings and being around people. When they first got here, of course, this is a much different environment than maybe what they came from. They have huge dispersal distances, so it's not like they necessarily just came from the next town over, and they're coyotes that have been used to living in urban areas. They can disperse long distances, 50 miles, 100 miles, 500 miles have been documented for juveniles dispersing across the landscape. So, as we get used to them, they're also getting used to us. So when we get used to them, we see a little bit of complacency. People get used to them, they see them around, they get, accustomed to seeing them. Kind of the fears might decline, or maybe the fears escalate. Either way, the coyotes that live on the landscape also get used to us. And I will tell you that their fears quickly decline when they live in these urban settings. Densities of coyotes in urban settings can be higher than in non-urban settings, and the reason is because resources are readily available. Coyotes are what I consider to be one of the greatest opportunists that we have in this country, not just this state. They can eat anything. They eat fruits, they eat vegetation, they eat garbage when it's available when they live in these urban settings. They eat rodents, mice, rats, rabbits, squirrels. They'll take advantage of anything that's on the landscape. They'll eat bird seed. They get attracted to bird feeders because bird feeders attract rodents. So now you have an issue where you have a coyote that's coming into a bird feeder, and you're seeing it regularly. One of the things that people used to think was that coyotes were only active at night. They were considered a nocturnal species, and one of the issues that comes up when people call us about coyotes is they're concerned because they're seeing a coyote during the day. and they thought coyotes were nocturnal. So a daytime sighting all of a sudden becomes a dangerous thing because it's typically assumed that that animal is rabid, and a rabid animal is a dangerous animal. Back in 2018, we had a rabid coyote go through Greenberg. It probably bit about 10 people before it was killed. I think it was killed down in Yonkers somewhere. So there's a lot of misconceptions out there about coyotes on the landscape, one of them being that if I see them during the day that there's something wrong, it's a sick animal. So coyotes have become so accustomed to being around people in these urban landscapes, and there's so many resources that are so readily available for them that they can be out any time of the day. I consider them to be what we call arrhythmic, which means they're out when resources are available, when they need to be out. There are times of the year when they are more visible than other times. Right now is one of those times. We're in the breeding season. We're going into the denning period. And that breeding period, they're moving across the landscape. They're vocalizing quite a bit. And that's one of the things that upsets people also. They hear a family unit of coyotes, a breeding pair, maybe pups, and they think it's 100 coyotes howling on the landscape. They think it's coyotes that killed something and they're advertising their prey. I'll tell you right now, that would be a very poor evolutionary adaptation for a predator to take a large prey item and then tell every other predator on the landscape that, hey, I'm over here with a large prey item, come find me and have at it. So when you hear those vocalizations, those are family units. It's usually 2 to 4 or 5 individuals, maybe 6 individuals, but they've done some studies and they show that once it gets past 2 individuals, you have no idea how many animals are on that landscape, how many are involved in that calling that you're hearing. So they become more visible. We hear them more often. They're moving around the landscape right now. They're breeding. And then the other season that's coming up next is that denning and that pup rearing period. So these are 2 times of the year when we see incidents. DEC does a press release every year where we let people know, hey, it's time. Coyote issues could be coming up. Springtime is here. Denning is here. Males become very territorial. Males do not like small dogs on their landscape. The majority of issues that DEC sees with coyotes involve coyotes and dogs. It can be a dog that was attacked by a coyote, or it could be coyotes that are simply communicating with dogs on the landscape. And we see both scenarios pretty regularly. The dogs that seem to be most at risk to a coyote attack are smaller dogs, less than 15 pounds, but we've seen incidents with larger dogs. We had one gentleman that let a dog out. It was blind in one eye. It was a very old dog. It was infirmed, and a coyote killed that dog. So we see it every year. We get complaints about coyotes taking dogs. It happens. It happened around here. It happened in Greenberg. We've also seen other incidents. We saw incidents back in 2018 in Mount Pleasant where there was a coyote that was very habituated to people, and it started to become a problem. It was hanging out on people's decks, and it seemed that people were feeding it. We've seen scenarios where coyotes have become bad coyotes in other places where they're being fed. And that also contributes to their kind of arrhythmic behavior pattern, where they can be active any time of the day. So if they know that somebody's putting out dog or cat food or putting out food intentionally for them, and it's happening at a certain time of day, we all know that dogs can be conditioned, and coyotes are dogs like any other, and they can be conditioned. So, dogs can be domesticated, coyotes can get used to getting food from people. The only difference is, and we see this with dogs too, dogs get upset with their owners. And, sometimes people get bit, sometimes people get scratched. I've looked up the statistics on how many people go to the emergency room every year in the United States from dog attacks, and it was a crazy number. I can't even remember the number off the top of my head, but it was a crazy number. And then think about a wild animal that's become habituated to people by people giving it food, whether it's intentionally or unintentionally. But now it associates people with food. But this is not a domestic dog that has seen you as its owner and companion its whole life. This is a wild animal that has teeth that it can beg with when it gets hungry and it wants food. So recently, up in Dutchess County, Hyde Park, and I hope this day would never come during my career, but it did, we had 4 people in the last 7 months that were bitten by coyotes. And we started putting the reports together and talking to people, and we realized people are feeding these coyotes. It seemed it was unintentional. It's believed that people were trying to feed a colony of feral cats But what they ended up doing was feeding coyotes. And then coyotes got used to being around people, and when coyotes get upset or something bothers them, coyotes fight. And now you have coyotes that are habituated to people, and they get food from people, and maybe they see people as another thing on the landscape that, when they're not in that right mood, they might fight. I hope they never look at us as the next thing on the menu. I don't think that'll ever happen. But there are situations that can make coyotes more dangerous than other coyotes. One of those situations is feeding them, whether it's intentional or unintentional. We don't want coyotes to get so habituated to people that they lose their fear. And that's what we see in these suburban settings. They have no reason to fear people down here. Most people don't trap down here. I don't know if there's anybody in this room that has a friend or a relative that has a trapping license that traps coyotes in Westchester. There's not a lot of people down here that do that. There are probably very few people that hunt coyotes down here. Researchers have indicated that coyotes that are pursued by people, whether it's hunting or trapping, are less of a problem than coyotes that are not. They get very relaxed around people. People tend to want to take pictures, take videos of them. Like I said, the people get kind of acclimated to the coyote as well. And there are certain things that we think that you should do to make that coyote feel uncomfortable. And I'll talk about them a little bit in a second. So another time of year that we see coyotes become a little bit of an issue is after that pup rearing period, they disperse in the fall. So now we have juvenile coyotes that are moving across the landscape. So we have a third season now that coyotes can become an issue. And the reality is we have reports all year round of coyotes taking dogs. But this dispersal period, I think, is a big one, even more than the denning period. I will admit, from all the conversations that I've had with people, that denning period, those territorial males, can be a big problem with other dogs in their territory. But I think also that dispersal period, when you have juveniles, it seems like a lot of times those juveniles will kind of pack up. And that's where we hear about packs of coyotes. Although it could be adults, there are adults that are non-breeders that will hang out in groups. But I think often we get these juveniles that might hang out in groups as they, move across the landscape looking to establish a territory of their own. And I think these juveniles, I think of them like teenagers. And, what do teenagers do? They get in trouble. So what do juvenile coyotes do when they're moving across the landscape? They get into trouble. So that's a third time a year. So from the perspective of DEC, just to let everybody know, coyotes are protected by law. They are considered a game species. And what that means for a game species is that they have an open season for take, and then they have a closed season. That open season is for both trapping and hunting in New York. The trapping season runs from October 25th until February, 15th? And then the hunting season runs from October 1st to, I believe it's the last Sunday in March, which this year I believe is March 26th. So there are periods where people that are licensed, if you have a trapping license in New York, if you have a hunting license in New York, that you can lawfully take coyotes during the respective seasons, trapping and hunting. The only issue is, look around where you guys live. How many opportunities are there? How many properties are there for people that do have a trapping or hunting license to get out there and trap coyotes or hunt coyotes and perform some level of population management? And there's a lot of people, a lot of opinions, a lot of disagreement on coyote management, whether they should be taken off the landscape. There's some thoughts that with that pack behavior, that if you take that breeding female, that other coyotes are going to start breeding. But I'll tell you, we don't see that alpha male, alpha female, beta female like you see with wolves. They're either females that breed because they're of breeding age, or they're females that haven't bred because they haven't pair bonded yet. I don't think that if you remove a single female, all of a sudden you have 10 other females that haven't been breeding because that alpha female's on the landscape and now they're going to. I just don't think that that's the case. No research out there has indicated to me that that's the case. I think any of the females on the landscape can breed any opportunity they have. Coyotes pair bond for life. That's the generic message, but any species that pair bonds for life, there's always a lot of, for lack of a better term, messing around that goes on out there. But that pair bonding period occurs in the winter, and that's another time that you see a lot of animals moving across the landscape, that pre-breeding stage, that pair bonding stage that starts probably in December. So we have the open season, and a lot of people think, well, if there's an open season, why do people need a permit ever to take a coyote? Well, DEC does issue permits to take coyotes outside of their respective open seasons. DEC has an SOP that we follow that lays down guidelines for dealing with coyotes and coyote incidents. We categorize those incidents, Category 1, Category 2, Category 3, Category 4. And there are times, depending on what category that incident falls into, that DEC would actually recommend removing a coyote, even if it's outside of an open season. So at that time, DEC has the ability to issue a permit to anybody. It can be a municipality, and we've done that before. It can be an individual, like a homeowner. It can be somebody who's affected. Maybe it wasn't on their property. And that's one of the problems that comes up when we talk about issuing permits for coyotes that have been acting badly on the landscape, is if we issue the permit to the affected party, well, maybe the incident didn't happen on their property. Maybe it happened 5 miles from their property. So sure, I can issue a permit to that person, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they can act on it. Or if they do act on it, it's only on their own property because that's where the permit is for. And it's not likely that that's going to resolve the issue. But Category 1 and Category 2 coyotes are the ones where we would issue permits to take outside of an open season. Category 2 is it's a threat to a pet, or it has attacked a pet or killed a pet. And Category 1 is it's deemed a threat to humans or has attacked a human. And I had never seen that. I saw it once in 2010 in the city of Rye, so I can't say I had never seen it before this Dutchess County incident. It did happen. It was a coyote that ran through a backyard. There was a couple small children in the backyard. Coyote ran at one of the small kids, took a bite, quickly changed his mind, took off. They never had another incident. And I hoped it would never happen again. Then all of a sudden Dutchess County popped up. And we realized it was because of the feeding, but it doesn't make a difference why it's happening. It's still happening, and we need to deal with it. The good thing is, because we figured out why it was happening, we can at least address that through public education and outreach. The difficult thing is, go to a city like Poughkeepsie and try to get everybody to stop littering and putting food out for their cats and dogs and take all their bird feeders and put them away. And it's difficult to try to get this message out to everybody too, which is why I'm glad people are here. I'm glad they're filming this. They can put it on their website, and this information becomes available. Now, aside from when we issue a permit to take a coyote outside of an open season, and mind you, when a permit is issued, that is for a lethal take. It is not a permit to capture a coyote and move it to the next community, because our thought process is, if I issue a permit because it's a Category 1 or a Category 2 coyote, and this thing is a threat to pets, or this thing is a threat to humans, the last thing I'm going to do is let somebody move that coyote on the landscape to the next adjacent town or the next adjacent county. Anywhere in our region where you move a coyote, there's other coyotes. This coyote is going to be chased out probably. It's going to get hit by a car, or it's just going to be the same problem it was there that it was here. And that goes for anywhere in New York State. They have coyotes in New York City now. So they're all over the state at this point. They are everywhere. And we just don't want to get in the business of moving coyotes around the landscape. There's the old school things that we fall back on. You might be moving disease around and whatnot. But the reality is we don't want to move coyotes, bad coyotes, from one place to another. Now, aside from when we issue a permit, and this doesn't always sit well with folks, but I will say this because it is in law. According to environmental conservation law, if a coyote injures property, whoever's property was injured may take coyotes at any time in any manner after their property is injured. Now, that is within reason, and that is up to the discretion of an officer if an officer is ever called, and up to the discretion of the judge if that goes into a court appearance. It's going to be up to them as to whether, if you're still trapping 3 years down the road and your dog was killed 3 years ago and you don't have a dog now, they might say, why are you still trapping? But the reality is, in law, it says that if property is injured, a coyote can be taken at any time in any manner. Now, I will tell you, laws like that were created way back in the day primarily to protect livestock. So a coyote comes and it's getting into your chicken coop. It kills your chickens one day. You build a new coop, you get a bunch more chickens. Guess where that coyote is going to come back to? That was a nice meal. It's going to go back to that chicken coop. So That intent was primarily for situations like that. But now we deal with it with situations like dogs being attacked, dogs being killed. The difficulty with saying that person can take a coyote now at any time in any manner is A, they may not have the means to. They might have to pay somebody to do it. So now all of a sudden they're incurring a huge cost to do so. But sometimes I still feel it's the best thing and the most appropriate thing to do at the time. And the other thing is, now if there's no more dog attracting that coyote to the property, the likelihood of them catching that coyote on their property, especially if they own a quarter of an acre down here, is slim to none. So there's good reasons to issue those permits and there's good reasons to have that in law, but it doesn't always help in every situation. I always advocate that the municipality get involved when there's a situation like this. If I have a coyote on the landscape, and this is what happened up in the town of Poughkeepsie, we got the town involved, we got the city involved, we got Marist College involved, we got everybody involved, and they got a trapper on the landscape. Cost wasn't incurred by the people that were bitten, which is nice, because they probably, they're thinking, why should I be responsible for managing coyotes on the landscape? And to a degree, they're right. So there are issues. Just because the opportunity is there doesn't mean that it's always the best answer, and it doesn't always mean that it's going to solve the problem. I think, after doing this for 18 years and seeing what I've seen in the reports that I've gotten, that this public and outreach and education campaign that I've been on is our best bet. I think nipping things in the bud, like feeding feral cats outside, feeding coyotes intentionally or unintentionally, if you know it's happening, stop doing it. But I think that this is the best way that we can make changes. The problem is, quite often, in every scenario, nobody likes to be told they have to change some aspect of their life to accommodate a species that's relatively new on the landscape and is potentially a threat to their property. Nobody wants to think that it's their responsibility to change the way they act in order to accommodate this animal on the landscape that they're not happy with being there in the first place. But there are a number of things that we can do. If you look at our website, dec.ny.gov, there's a little plug right there. Take a look at it. There is a lot of good information in there about coyotes. There is a lot of good information about what to do. I brought about 20 copies of a handout that we have here that points out some of these things. I didn't realize there was going to be as many people here as there is, but I have 20 of them. I think this can also be viewed on our website. If it isn't, I will send people a link. I will give the town a link. They can put it on our website so that we can see it. And it talks about all the things that we can do. Like I said, people don't always want to make those accommodations, but I think the accommodations are going to stop dogs from dying on the landscape. So one of the things that I tell people, and it mentions it on here, is always walk dogs on a leash. Okay? So coyotes get something that I've it's the only phrase I've ever coined as a biologist. I call it prey fixation. So a coyote gets fixated on a small dog. This was very evident in a video that was sent to us after an incident in Dutchess County where these 4 people were bitten. There was a coyote that confronted a dog on a golf course that was being walked, and it was on leash, being walked by its owner. And that coyote was absolutely 100% fixated on that dog. And it's almost as if they don't know the human being is there. So a lot of people walk dogs on long leashes, those retractable leashes. A lot of people have them. My friends have them. I say forget about the retractable leash. Use a short leash, keep that dog by your side, so that when a coyote sees that dog, the next thing he sees is that human being. All right, we are much bigger than coyotes. Average size of coyotes in New York is about 35 pounds. We get reports of 100-plus pound coyotes all the time. We don't see it. We kill a lot of coyotes every year, trapping and hunting. We don't see coyotes that big. They're on average 35 to 40 pounds. But that's a formidable opponent to a 15-pound dog. Walk dogs on a short leash. Avoid that prey fixation. Let them know that a human being is present and that you are a threat to that coyote. We always say act aggressively. Make yourself big, wave your arms, scream, yell. People do that sometimes, and it doesn't work. We get phone calls all the time. I was standing on my porch or I was in my house. I saw a coyote in the yard. I opened the window. I yelled, waved my arms. And you know what that coyote did? It stopped and it stared, or it sat down and it looked. And people often perceive that as a threat. That's a curious animal. Coyotes are extremely curious. The first thing that they're going to do when you have an interaction with them is they're going to stop and they're going to watch you. And they're going to try to determine what's your threat level. And if you're deemed no threat, it's just going to go on with its day. If you're deemed as a threat, it's going to leave. And that's what we have to do, is we have to make them feel uncomfortable and want to leave. So we're walking that dog on a short leash now. Good first step. Then when we see that coyote, carry a couple rocks in your pocket. Chuck them at him. At first, when I used to tell people to do that, I was like, man, maybe I shouldn't be telling people to do that. According to law, harassing wildlife or worrying wildlife is considered a take. But there's a lot of websites all around the country now that say, municipalities everywhere, USDA, they tell people, you see a coyote in an area you don't want it to be, make it feel uncomfortable, throw rocks, throw sticks. I tell people, spray it with a garden hose. If you're on your deck and that thing comes through the yard, spray it with a hose. Do what you can to make that animal feel uncomfortable. Don't let them feel comfortable. Don't pick up the phone. Don't snap pictures for 5 minutes. Don't take a video and then send it to all your friends. Get that coyote out of there. Let it know that it is not welcome. Waving your arms and making loud noises from inside your house does not do that. It really doesn't. But if I can get to a safe place on a porch and spray it with a hose or throw rocks at it, I think that gives it a little more of a message. Now, what people have to understand is, I'm not telling you to go to the park where we know there's an active coyote den, and we have a pair of coyotes that are just doing their thing and they have not been a problem, and they're minding their business trying to raise their pups. Don't go there and start harassing these animals. Coyotes are going to get defensive. A defensive animal is a dangerous animal. You corner a coyote at a den site and it's got pups in that den. That is now a dangerous animal. I'm not telling people to go out and seek coyotes on the landscape and start harassing them. I'm telling you that when you're walking your dog and a coyote approaches you, to harass it, to make it uncomfortable, to try to make it go away. I'm telling you, when you're having a picnic in the backyard, you're having a barbecue and you're at the table and this thing enters the yard because it's curious, it smells food for whatever reason, it hears dogs barking, the dog's attracted it, which they do. I'm telling you to make that animal feel uncomfortable, to harass that animal. So since I brought up the dog thing again, and I mentioned it before, that there are interactions with dogs and coyotes, realize that. We had a biologist that had a couple of dogs. Those dogs would be outside every night. They'd make a racket. The neighbors would complain, but the coyotes would come visit. And it wasn't with animosity. It was just to come hang out with that other canid in their territory. And sometimes he would let his dogs run, and they would actually hang out with these coyotes. But the reality is dogs attract coyotes. You might have a backyard, you let your dog out at night. It smells like a dog. Your dog barks. Coyotes hear that dog barking. They're curious. They're going to come check it out. It might not be a threat to your dog. I would always assume it was, though. But it might be an animal that's just curious. He wants to come hang out with that other dog. But I don't want that. I don't want that coyote feeling comfortable hanging around in my backyard. At that point, it's getting more and more acclimated to people. If you feed pets outside, now it's getting food. Again, it's associating that food with people. It's just a matter of time. So that's how they are in the law. We can issue those permits to take. It's a tool that's out there, but I still think this public education and outreach is the best thing. So now we're walking dogs on a short leash. We're making them feel uncomfortable. We've learned that there's coyotes on the landscape, so the next thing is we're taking the bird feeder in, because I know the bird feeder attracts rodents, rodents attract coyotes. I know that coyotes can eat garbage, I know that coyotes can eat bird seed, so I know there's an additional attractant there. Get rid of the bird feeder, because coyotes might actually eat that bird seed. Put the garbage in a place where it's inaccessible to that coyote. So we're walking dogs on a short leash now, we're harassing them when we see them. We're cutting out the food, whether it's incidental or intentional, okay? And then One last thing that people can do, and this is a controversial thing, and it's not always permitted in all villages, cities, towns, is put up a fence. Now that also requires incurring a cost, and it's something that people don't always like to hear about. They don't want to spend money putting up a fence. But I will tell you, if you are concerned about your dog having an interaction with a coyote, the best thing that you can do is exclude that coyote from the area that the dog uses. Coyotes can dig. They can dig under a fence, bury that fence 1 foot down. Bury that fence 1 foot down and 1 foot out. When a coyote tries to dig under a fence, it's going to try to dig right up against that fence. So you extend that fence underground 1 foot out. It's not going to get under that fence. A 4-foot fence is what's typically told to people to keep out coyotes from a backyard. I will tell you, coyotes can climb a fence. I've had reports of coyotes climbing a 4-foot fence. But that coyote, to do that, has to really want to get in that backyard. But a 15-pound dog that's left outside all night might give that coyote an excuse to want to get in that backyard. So the fence, I think, is the best alternative, but it's still not that golden, or what is it, silver bullet? Golden bullet? We'll call it a golden bullet tonight. It's still not that answer. It's not solving all our problems. So the other thing that we can do is don't leave pets outside unattended. Before you leave a dog outside, or before you put a dog outside, go outside and make a ruckus. So if there's a coyote around, maybe you'll scare him off and thwart any impending attack. Go outside, make a ruckus, let him know you're there. Then once you're sure it's safe, then let the dog out. Keep the dog close by. Don't just let him out in the backyard. Don't let him just go run in the woods. Keep that dog under your supervision. It's incredible to me how many reports I've gotten where people let a dog out in the backyard, and even when they're still there, if there's no fence, that coyote will come in and take that dog right out from under you. Coyotes have taken dogs off leash too. So the last thing that I want to talk about is when there is an incident. I've tried to do everything right, but still we've had an incident. We've done all this public outreach and education, but still we have incidents. So what do? And I think that's the most important thing that can come out of this meeting. People don't know what to do when something happens. And I think the best thing to do, I'll tell you the best thing to do, is let us at DEC know. Because we're the ones that are going to give you the information that you need, the correct information, what you're entitled to do by law. We can issue that permit. You might be amenable to getting that permit. You may be willing to pay somebody to take that coyote. But what you need to do is get us a call so we can get an incident report on file. So the incident that occurred down in this area recently, I think it was a couple of months ago, a dog was killed. And that dog was being walked. I don't know if it was a dog that was being walked on leash, and I'll tell you why I don't know. We never got called. We still do not have an incident report on file about this incident. The only way we found out about it was about 2 weeks ago. Somebody said, "Hey, did you see this news story?" And I clicked on it and I looked, and it was an incident that made the news. It made it everywhere, but for some reason it never made it to us. So the first people that should get called when there's an incident is DEC, the Bureau of Wildlife. We have a phone number that is manned every day. It is 845-256-3098. I'm going to work with your town supervisor to try to get that number on the website. I think it's important that those numbers be out there and available to people so they know what number to call when something happens. Now, that's when there's been an incident and there's not an immediate threat. If you have a situation like we had up in Dutchess County and we have some bad coyotes and there potentially is an immediate threat, that one on the golf course was deemed an immediate threat, that person actually called the police. The police responded, that coyote was removed. It was removed lethally. And that follows our guidelines. And at that point, we were saying, hey, you need to start removing coyotes. It is very unfortunate, and nobody at DEC feels good about it, the fact that coyotes had to be removed, potentially because they were being fed by people and got acclimated to people. I think the coyotes got the raw end of that deal. I really do. However, once that behavior is learned, myself and many experts out there, and we see it with black bears, once that behavior is learned, it's our opinion that there's no going back. You're not going to haze that animal. You're not going to make it change its mind. It does what it does now. It's learned that behavior. It's accustomed to getting food from people. That coyote has become a problem on the landscape. Our recommendation is to remove that coyote. The problem is you don't know if you're removing the right coyote or not. So we don't put a limit on how many coyotes can be taken. When I issue a permit to somebody to take a coyote that's deemed a threat, I don't say you can take one coyote. I say you can take coyotes, because they don't know which coyote it is. And it's not that we're making an effort to remove this animal from the landscape. You're never going to do that. There's always going to be coyotes. You're going to live with them for the rest of time. They're always going to be out there. Even if a municipality put every penny they had into it and exhausted all their means to try to eliminate coyotes, if you were lucky enough to do it for a year, the next year, you're probably going to have coyotes again. They're always going to be out there. So keep that in mind. When we issue permits, when we recommend removal, when law allows removal, the intention is not we are eliminating coyotes from the landscape. I refuse to implicate a species for the behavior of a couple individuals in that species. The reality is we probably have about 30 to 50,000 coyotes in New York, and we get a handful of complaints every year. We get a couple of dogs that get reported as being attacked or killed. And it's a serious incident when it happens, and it's something that we take very seriously. But at the same time, DEC just doesn't say coyotes are bad. We want to get rid of every coyote on the landscape. I'll never be a biologist that's in favor of that. I'll never be a biologist that says you can kill coyotes year-round. They're no longer protected. Coyotes play a beneficial role in the landscape. They are that top end of the food chain here. They are that predator that controls small mammal populations. They are a great benefit to our ecosystem. So we leave them on the landscape. You have coyotes that are not acting badly. You leave them on the landscape, because there's a chance if you remove that coyote, you're going to get one that's going to come in and act badly. So we don't just implicate them. We don't just say, have at it, kill them all. That's not what they're saying. That's not what I'm saying. That's not what we're doing. We're not implicating a species here. We are saying when you get an individual that's acting badly and it is deemed a threat, then we recommend removal at that point. So one other thing that you can do, and this is the last thing I'll talk about as far as what we can do to live with coyotes. We talked about the leash, we talked about feeding, we talked about harassing them. The other thing that people can do is kind of modify their surroundings a little bit. Remove hiding places, remove brush piles. Think about removing shrubs, places where coyotes can hide and ambush a small dog. Modifications of our surroundings. But again, like I say, that's a difficult thing to convince people to do. To modify their surroundings, to modify their lifestyle, to accommodate coyotes. But we're not doing it to accommodate coyotes, we're doing it to protect our property. That's why we're doing it, and that's why you need to think about it. We are doing it to protect our property. I'm not going to not do it because I want to prove a point, because I shouldn't have to do it, and then my small dog is dead. I should do what it takes to prevent it from happening in the first place. And that's the message that I want to get out here. And I'll continue this campaign of public outreach and education. And, for the rest of my career. I hope this gets posted, the video that I did here tonight. I hope it gets posted on the town website. There are others that I've done that are posted on municipal websites. And I hope you guys tell your friends, because I know there's more than 30 people that live in Mount Pleasant. I would like to come to one of these meetings one time and see 2,000 people at one of these meetings. I would love it. I would love to know that when I do this, I'm getting that information out to as many people as I possibly can. I think we need to take advantage of social media, because that's the avenue that we have to get that information out there these days. So I'm glad to see the camera, even though it's terrifying me right now and I'm sweating uncontrollably, but I am very happy to see that camera sitting there filming this. Does anybody have any questions?
You don't mention cats.
Yeah, so, okay, thank you. So cats also, if a cat is taken, it's the same thing. That is injuring property. That coyote can be taken. The issue with cats is we have a lot of phone calls. We get a lot of phone calls about coyotes taking cats, and then we interview the people, and then the reality is they don't know why their cat disappeared. And we're not just going to make an assumption that the reason their cat disappeared is because there's a coyote in the area. Coyotes do kill cats. They did a diet study back in 2013. Dan Bogan did it as part of a larger project. They looked at stomach contents of coyotes in Westchester specifically, and they did find anthropogenic food sources. Cats were considered one of them, but it was a very small part of their diet. Actually, it's funny, the largest part of their diet was white-tailed deer, likely scavenged roadkill.
You think, have you spoken at schools?
I've done a couple, not many like this. When I've done talks at schools, it's more from the biology perspective, trying to get the kids excited about biology and maybe being a biologist themselves someday. I do give information about living with coyotes because that's the time to really shape people's minds when you speak to the younger audiences. Because, you know, there's that saying, we all know it, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. I'm an example of that. You can ask my wife if you like. I am very difficult to get to change my ways, but educating children, you know, that is the time of their life where they can be shaped. And if we get the information out there, hopefully they pay attention to it. And maybe we start to see a change over time where there's fewer incidents because they've been educated and they do the things that they need to do to avoid conflicts. I saw your hand go up. Sorry. It's going to be hard for me to remember what order. Yeah.
Get rid of your bird feeders.
Yeah.
I've had 2 coyote on my patio.
Mhm.
I have a small plot of land. What I'm most concerned is I'm trying to be environmentally friendly, good, and I have a compost pile.
Yeah.
Which is your vegetable scraps,
Yep.
dirt, cardboard, whatever. And
Yep.
it's near the side of the house right now. Do I have to get rid of that and add more garbage to, you know?
My recommendation would be if that compost is attracting coyotes, then yes. But I hate to tell people not to be environmentally conscious. I work for the Department of Environmental Conservation. We compost, you know? We recommend composting all the time.
Is there anything you could put in it to then deter from?
There are people that say using different urines, like people have always suggested put out wolf urine. I don't know, the lineage of coyotes in New York shows that at some point they bred with wolves way back in the day when they were moving into New York. So I don't know that that's going to keep a coyote away. There's been suggestions of putting out containers of ammonia to mask the scent. We tell people to do that when they put out their garbage. Even if they make the garbage inaccessible to bears, bears can still smell the garbage. So we've told people put out jars of ammonia, soak rags with ammonia. You have to be careful though. There are certain things that might be labeled as a pesticide that you can't use off your property. If you're going to do that, it can only be on your property. I would love to be able to tell people to use dog spray, but I can't. It's registered as a pesticide. It's not registered for use with coyotes. It's only registered for use with dogs. So I can't tell people use dog spray if you have an incident with a coyote. And the other thing is you can only use it on your own property. So, I hate to tell you that you can't compost, but I think the best bet is if you have coyotes that are being attracted by it, maybe think about putting it off until the coyote's behavior is changed. But, if you have a lot of people that are composting, it's going to continue to be an attractant. But maybe make it so that they can't get to it. Maybe fence it so that even if they smell it, they don't learn that, it's worth it to come back here every day because there's a reward that I'm getting when I come back here. So I would say put a fence around it, make it inaccessible.
It is an offense.
Good.
What about gardens that have berries and vegetables? Do they tend to be attracted to that?
No, I don't think those are attractants. I think those are just things they're taking advantage of on the landscape. But I don't think they're seeking those things out. I don't think a garden specifically is going to attract them. But if it comes through your yard and this is an animal that's on a pattern and it comes through your yard, or even if it's on a foray and it's going through your yard for the first time, because animals take forays. They take forays outside of their home ranges all the time. They go places for the first time at some point in their life. I'm not saying that a coyote wouldn't take advantage of it, but I don't see that, and we don't see that as an attractant specifically.
Do coyotes only come in the coloration you showed?
Oh my goodness. Coyotes come in all sorts of colorations. We've seen coyotes that resemble German shepherds. We've seen coyotes, I've personally seen one that is pure black. And I mean jet black, pure black, the entire animal. It was really cool. I saw it when I was bow hunting for deer up in the Catskills. And when I first saw it, I thought it was a domestic dog. And then I realized when it went under my tree stand, that's a coyote. And that was back before I was a biologist. I was younger at that time. I didn't even know there was black coyotes. There are blonde coyotes. There are red-phased coyotes. They come in more variations than any other species that I've ever seen. You know, you can talk about screech owls come in a gray phase and a red phase, and, you know, black bears come in a cinnamon and a black and a blonde phase. But coyotes, man, there are a lot of variations in coloration. I've seen coyotes that look like huskies that have a lot of white in them. In fact, on our guide, our sportsman guide, our hunting and trapping guide, I think it was back in 2013 or 2012, the coyote on the cover looked kind of like a husky. It had that black and white coloration. When you looked at it, you first looked at it, you thought, oh my, that's a wolf. But it wasn't. It was a coyote. So there is a wide range of colors.
Is it true that they keep the tail down?
Tails are always down. But a lot of domestic dogs run with those tails down too. So it's not necessarily, you know, an indicator that this is a coyote versus a domestic dog.
A comment and question. I know in Newcastle, they have a compost program.
Mhm.
And you compost, and then you bring it to a central place and do the compost.
Yeah, so it's away from your property.
Right, so maybe it's have now Pleasant
I like that.
too. Yeah, so you just put it in your little container.
It's kind of like the community garden, but,
Right,
you know, a different aspect of it. I like that. I hadn't heard of that before.
yeah, Newcastle has it.
Yeah, I think that's great. Is it fenced? Do you know?
Yeah, it's on that road where, right by the Sawmill and World Cup Gymnastics. and
Okay.
That road right there,
Yeah.
entrance to the Sawmill, that's where the place is where you go.
Yeah, I'd never thought of anything like that. That's really cool.
So that's just a comment on a solution.
Yeah.
This town wants to consider.
So then that way you don't have to do it in your backyard and potentially have an attractant in your backyard. That's great. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it.
Sure, and then my question is, from what you said, if you're on a trail, this happened to me, I was on a trail with my dog on a leash,
Mm-hmm.
and a coyote spotted us and started chasing me, and,
Yeah, we want to know about that.
and so A, you want to know about that?
Absolutely.
And B, I'm supposed to make a lot of noise and run? I mean, do I run?
Well, you know,
I ran
typically,
as fast as I could to-
typically you've probably heard this before. Typically, what people will say is don't run, because then you could trigger that predatory instinct, which is to chase. We thought that that might have been what triggered the first bite up in Dutchess County, is because it was a jogger, and he went running by, the coyote saw him, and he ran after him, and he bit him. But then we got the video from the second one, and the coyote ran up, bit the girl in the leg, and then sat down and stared at her. And when she didn't give it food, it went down and buried its face in a bowl of food that was on the sidewalk. So then we quickly realized they were being fed. But typically we're told, don't run. It sets up that predatory instinct. But that's a difficult situation for somebody to be faced with.
I mean, are you supposed
You know?
to think when you make a lot of noise, or?
I'd carry an air horn with me if I were you, or a stick, a walking stick,
What about a whistle,
a whistle.
like a police?
Yeah, sure. We know the air horns are effective, though, because we actually use them ourselves. We had a couple of bad coyotes in New Paltz that were being fed. We confronted the person that was feeding them but didn't care. And there's no law against feeding coyotes, so she continued. And so we wanted to see how would these coyotes respond. And my technician went out, and they were actually able to come across one of these coyotes in somebody's front yard. And they used an air horn, and it chased it off. So it's still a loud noise like that in its face is still enough to, you know, convince it to leave usually.
Two questions. If it's a smaller dog, should you pick the dog up? I've read that.
So my only experience with somebody doing that wasn't in a coyote incident. It was an incident with a white-tailed deer. And the deer went after their little dog. When you have females that have fawns, for some reason they don't like little dogs. I don't know what it is. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of Jack Russell Terriers myself, but that being said, that deer went after that little dog. She picked the dog up to try to protect it, and she ended up in the emergency room. She got beat up by that deer. I don't know what the right answer to that is. And I'll admit that to you people. I don't have the right answer for every scenario, because every coyote is going to react differently. And I'm not entirely certain that picking that dog up is the right scenario in that situation. I'm not sure what the best answer is in that situation. I've never been faced with it. I don't know anybody that's ever done it. I don't know what the result was if it was done. I would like to believe that, like I said, with that prey fixation, that all of a sudden now that human is in the picture, and that's going to change that coyote's mind. But a good rap with a stick might change his mind also.
My second question is, we saw a coyote in our yard with mange. Should that be reported?
No, mange is very common in coyotes and red foxes in our region. It's very common. We haven't seen any indication that coyotes with mange are any more of a threat to people than coyotes without mange. It's been believed by some people that they are more of a threat because now you have an unhealthy animal that's not necessarily acting normally, but none of the incidents that we ever had, nobody ever reported that the coyote was a mangy coyote. And when coyotes get it, they get it bad. And they usually don't survive mange, unfortunately. It usually ends up in complete alopecia, complete hair loss all over the body. And if it happens, they're just not going to survive very long like that. It's very uncomfortable for them. They won't survive the winter. They need a lot more resources and energy to survive at that point. They're probably not going to get it. And they just don't survive it. But like I said, indications are they're no more of a threat than any other coyote on the landscape. However, I will say, please don't approach that coyote. I don't want people to get in the habit of trying to, and I know this sounds like a joke, of trying to pick up a coyote to bring it to a wildlife rehabilitator. People have done it. I got a phone call one time of a woman screaming in her car because she picked up a red fox that was hit by a car, and she put it in her car with her and then called me screaming because now she had a red fox running around her car as she was driving down the road. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of picking up sick and injured wildlife just because you don't know how they're going to react. I heard a story one time of somebody trying to help a seal that was apparently injured or sick, and the seal bit her nose off. So, let's think twice about, reaching out. It's unfortunate, but, nature can be cruel. That's for sure.
Are there instances of wild dogs mating with the coyote?
So the lineage of coyotes in New York, there was a big gene study done way back in the day, and Roland Kayes presented it. He did a TV show, and they called the show Coy Wolves, Eastern Coy Wolves. He insists that they're still coyotes, but that genetic study showed that our coyotes in New York have both wolf DNA and dog DNA. So there's indications that they have bred with dogs, and there's indications that they have bred with wolves. I don't know that that's happening now. The researchers that I know and the biologists that I've spoken to said a coyote these days, because there's plenty of coyotes on the landscape to breed with. It's not like there's any shortage of females for a dispersing male to bond with. So at this point, because of the availability of other coyotes on the landscape, if a coyote interacts with a small dog, it's to kill it.
Manhattan has several projects.
Yeah, the Gotham Coyote Project.
Okay, so will coyotes be frightened and not be in those?
Oh, those projects. I'm sorry. I thought you were talking about my friend Mark Weckel's Gotham Coyote Project. Yeah, I don't know. I don't follow too closely what goes on with coyotes in New York City unless it makes the news. They have very few down there, but they don't typically sponsor removal programs down there. They did have one very recently that was acting a little weird, and it was wandering down a street. I think it was in Queens, and they actually captured that coyote and brought it to a facility. But there are very few facilities out there that are going to house coyotes. But yeah, I'm not really sure about their interactions down in New York City.
Projects with small buildings.
Yeah,
People running around.
yeah. I'm going to be honest with you right here. I don't have a lot of information about the interactions they have with coyotes or the behaviors that they note down there in New York City. But those are coyotes. I mean, you think about coyotes around here being acclimated to people. People get concerned when they see a coyote walking down the street in Greenberg or in Mount Pleasant or in Chappaqua. Think about New York City. What choice does that coyote have? And I tell people that all the time. It's not necessarily that there's something wrong with that coyote. It's what choice do they have? Lives in an urban setting. There's coyotes in Yonkers, Every year I get phone calls. I do public meetings like this in Yonkers every year. They want the coyotes gone. They're walking up and down the streets every day, every night. It's very common. But I'll tell you what, all the years that there's been coyotes down in Yonkers, I've never had an incident reported to me, which I think is amazing. I don't know if there's something else going on, that they're just not an issue down there when it comes to dogs. If people are more protective of their dogs down there, they don't let them be in situations where they could be attacked by a coyote. But we just don't hear of incidents in Yonkers where it's truly very, very populated with humans, and there are coyotes that interact with them every day. We just don't hear of incidents. And luckily we haven't heard of incidents, at least as far as I know of, in New York City as well.
I walk my kids down going to an area over here with the city, seeing coyotes quite frequently. Am I better off carrying air horn or pepper spray?
I can't tell you to carry pepper spray. I'd love to tell you to carry pepper spray.
Against coyotes?
Yeah, it would be.
Okay.
Yeah, I sprayed myself one time setting up a bear trap, and it was not fun. So if it, not that I'm as tough as a coyote, I'm not very tough. So, but that would be a difficult thing to deal with. But like I said, because it's registered as a pesticide, and you may only use pesticides on your own property, and you can only use them for the intended use, which is on the label. Nothing is out there marked as use with coyotes. There's bear spray, and there's dog spray, but there's no coyote spray. And again, you'd only be able to use it on your own property. Would it be effective? Sure. Sure would. Yeah, I bet you it would be effective. I have no doubt. But realize, depends on which direction that wind is blowing, you might get yourself too. I've talked to a lot of people about using bear spray, and if you spray it and that wind catches it, it's going to be right back in your face. So realize you might have a temporary issue yourself if you use it, which might make it more difficult for you to deal with a situation. So keep that in mind. Yeah, it's rough, man. It's just, yeah, it was a bad experience. Yeah.
So places where coyote will hunger and water, den, are they more like in the cemetery? Are they more in?
It tends to be in green spaces. We hear a lot of reports of foxes denning on private properties under sheds, but we don't get a lot of reports of coyotes denning in situations like that. But I'm not going to rule that out from happening. They'll take advantage of any site where they feel like they can set up and, protect their pups. But that's the thing. Foxes seem to, I don't know what it is about foxes. They seem to think it's safe for their fox kits to den under a shed on somebody's property. But I don't really think coyotes don't like to be disturbed at their den site. Canids will quickly change den sites if they're being disturbed also. Often coyotes will use multiple den sites throughout a season, not always, but sometimes. So the good thing is, if you do have a coyote denning on your property, it may be easy to get that coyote to move to a different den site. Den sites get full of parasites and waste and, around the den site, and they got pups in there. And, at some point they think, maybe it's time to move to a newer, cleaner den site. And I'm just hypothesizing that, but I'm sure that's one of the things that triggers them. But they can den in any situation. They'll den under the roots of an uprooted tree. They'll den in a woodchuck hole that they might further excavate. They could den in dense shrubbery. They'll den anywhere where they think they can put their pups where they'll be protected.
Has there been an increase in sightings or incidences lately, or is that just a social media?
Not according to our records. We haven't had a report from this area, from the Mount Pleasant area, since 2018. But then, like I said, then through media, we heard about this recent incident. But, there's probably more incidents now than there was when coyotes first arrived here 30 years ago, because of course populations have increased over that time. We don't know if populations are stable, increasing, decreasing at this point. My hypothesis is they're probably stable at this point. They've been here long enough now. They're fairly territorial. They have a home range. They're probably fairly stable in this area at this time. But
Due to construction that's happening across the land,
that might
more.
disperse them.
And then my only other question is about the traffic piece of it, that you said that there is a time period that
Yes.
How is that, yes, monitored as far as safety for other wild animals, or not other wild animals, but maybe your pets that go off the land, or children that happen to trespass?
So
I
let's.
know the safety of that, because I know there's property across from where I live, and, you know, I hear that there's traps put there.
Mhm.
I don't understand the safety.
So I'm going to switch the term from monitored to regulated, because it's not necessarily that they're monitored, although they are. If you set a trap on land, you have to check it once every 24 hours. So that's a type of monitoring, but what you're talking about, we deal with through regulation. So what we've done is we've made great efforts through regulation to try to reduce the likelihood of incidents involving pets and traps and humans in traps, by saying you can't set within 100 feet of a marked trail. You can't set within 100 feet of a school, a church, a playground. You can't set within 100 feet of an occupied dwelling without permission. So there's regulations. Then there's also regulations with respect to the sets themselves. So folks that are using foothold sets, they're non-lethal sets. So it is a live capture set. And we do have a trapper here tonight that could probably talk about that a little bit, but I don't know if he wants me to put him in the spotlight right now. But I have to admit, I am not a trapper myself, so I don't use these devices, but I help regulate these devices. But a foothold trap is, to some degree, a specific, let's call it, trap, a target-specific trap, in that if you catch a non-target animal, you can release it typically unharmed. Not sure what would happen to a cat if it gets caught in a foothold that's set for a coyote. I'm not sure that it would break a bone. But typically animals that are caught in these types of traps, non-target animals, can be released unharmed.
What about kids?
Yeah, if a kid steps on a number one, it's not even going to close around their foot. I mean, if it was a baby, sure. My hope is that, we're being more careful than that, especially if we know we're in an area where traps may be set. But like teenagers, something, kids, a number one foothold's not a threat to them.
If you're walking alone, is it now not good to walk at dusk or before dawn?
Eh.
Or, I've seen the coyote around 6 in the morning, and that's when that dog was killed. I think it was 6:30 in the morning.
If you know of a coyote pattern,
Yeah.
like if people are saying on social media that this coyote's being seen at sunset every night, then I would modify my behavior to avoid interaction with that animal. But like I said, coyotes are arrhythmic. They're out there all the time. It can be any time. We've seen incidents that occur midday. We've seen them that occur overnight. We've seen them that occur sunrise, sunset. That becomes more difficult for us to predict, is that timing of those events. And I think, that timing is opportunistic.
Do coyotes tend to stay away from bigger dogs? Do they see them as a threat?
I wouldn't say stay away from them. Like I said, I had that one friend that had coyotes that would interact with his dog. His dog was like a 65-pound dog, and his coyotes would interact with it. They would never try to harm it, but they would interact with it. Coyote and the dog would run around the woods.
But they wouldn't tend to attack?
No, but like I said, we did have an incident where a dog was attacked. It was an older dog. It was like a 60-pound dog. It was blind in one eye. It was, and that dog was attacked, likely because of the state that it was in. Coyote saw it as an opportunity. It's going to take this dog off the landscape. I'm not going to say that they're not a threat, that attack would never occur. There are coyotes that run in groups, and if they are juveniles, who knows what they would do if you get 6 of them running together and they come across a dog that's their size, maybe slightly bigger. If you know anything about turkeys, and I hate to switch species all the time, but I do. If you know anything about turkeys, you can have jakes, which are 1-year-old turkeys. You get a group of 6 of them, you can have the biggest, most dominant Tom, 3-year-old Tom in the woods, and those 6 jakes are going to kick his butt. So if you had 6 coyotes, you might have a 50-pound dog. I'm not going to rule out the chance that there could be an interaction, a negative interaction between those animals.
And I have a second question. I've been in my current house since 1995, and we saw lone coyotes.
Sure.
I mean, they were around.
Sure.
More recently, and very recently, we've seen like packs.
Yeah, groups of them.
Yeah,
So my
like
thought,
A big one,
yeah.
and then.
So my thought process starts to become, you know, is that a family unit? Is that mom, dad, the pups from this year, and a couple juvenile females that haven't dispersed yet? Typically, females don't disperse the same as males. Males are often dispersed physically from the family unit. It happens with all sorts of species. They're run off. It prevents inbreeding. There's evidence out there that when coyote densities get really high, inbreeding occurs anyway. Dispersal mechanisms don't always play out the way they're supposed to. But
And are they more aggressive? Like, it seems to me, and I don't know, again, from social media or what, it seems that there's this more aggressive.
I think, so it's that mob mentality, right? When I was by myself when I was a kid, I never, well, I was going to say I never did anything wrong. That's funny. My parents would be laughing right now if they saw this. But when I was acting by myself, there were certain things that I would never do. But when I got with that group of other teenagers, boy, it was really easy to be convinced that it's okay to do this, even though I know it's wrong. In coyotes, I would never rule that out also. You have 6 coyotes running together. Sure, I think it's fair to assume that they might act differently than a single coyote. Often when coyotes take deer, when they're injured deer, they might have been hit by a car, they have a broken leg. The reports that we get are it's a group of coyotes chasing that deer, not a single individual chasing that deer. So certainly they do act different in groups than they do solitary. Sure, I mean, they're going to feel more bold when there's a group of them. You know, lions hunt in a pride. Excellent. Excellent.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you. Come pick up one of these.
Here we have some more copies.
And then, like I said, I'm hoping that they put our contact information on their website so that folks know where to go. Tell your friends. If you have an incident, make sure you contact DEC. If you need the number, check the town's website or Google it. dec.ny.gov is our website. Take a look. Find our regional office. We are the Region 3 headquarters, and you'd want to call the wildlife office. We have somebody on that phone every day. We'll be able to talk to you. We'll get an incident report filled out. We'll advise you. We'll guide you. We'll work you through the whole process. Thank you, folks. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to me tonight.
Thank you. Just so you know, this was a live stream meeting, like a regular town board meeting, so everyone at home was able to watch it. Also, it'll be recorded. I think Lenny records it. I think it goes on YouTube or something like that, where people can watch it anytime they want. So it'll be saved. It'll be archived. We'll also, whatever Kevin can give me as far as information, we'll put it on the website, phone numbers and advice. That'll all be on a section on the town website. Again, I thank you for taking the time and hope you enjoyed it.
You're right. You're right. That's yeah, sure. A little bit of hair loss. That's kind of visible to me. You look at the tail. No, you can tell. Look at the points of the ears. Look at that long snout. Very typical. Wolves also, people don't realize about wolves, their feet are huge. Their feet are huge. Yeah, the legs are. Well, he's probably got, I mean, look at the tail. It's mostly gone. He's got mange.